Welcome to the second edition of 2023's DevRel Roundtables, brought to you by the one and only, as you see here, hopefully likely on your left screen, Matthew Revel, the head of Hoopy and of developerrelations.com and of these DevRel Roundtables, and the reason why we all get together to talk about DevRel topics. I am Matthew's co-host, Rebecca Marshburn, the head of the Uncommon community at Common Room, which is an intelligent community growth platform that helps you build better developer communities, respond to issues and bugs faster, and really drive and measure that impact of your developer community work on the business itself. But that's enough about me. Matthew, would you like to say hello before I introduce the theme of today's panel?
Yeah, for sure. Well, as you said, I'm Matthew Revel. I work at Hoopy, and thank you to Common Room for sponsoring this episode of DevRel Roundtable. And really, I'm just excited to get stuck in and talk to the people we've got with us as guests today.
All right. Well, without further ado, so everyone knows what the theme is as we introduce these expert guests. Today's theme is re-engaging communities after a break. So we thought it would be timely now that it's at the end of January 2023. People came back after the second week of January. That first week is always pretty much a blur. And you're starting to be like, how do I do this job? And what was I doing? And what were my key goals? And now that it's a different year, are those goals the same or different? So there's a lot of ways that each person's experiencing that in their jobs, and that includes our community members and ourselves within our roles and how we're serving their roles and what their changing goals are perhaps after a break. So that's a holiday break, for example, but there's seasonality in terms of summers, in terms of children. There's all sorts of breaks in all parts of the world. And if you're in the northern hemisphere or southern hemisphere, that might be a little different. So as we go through seasonality, as different communities experience different breaks, different seasonality, how do we engage those communities, and how do we meet our community members where they are when they want to be there with what they need at that time? So without any more discussion from me, we'll let our expert guests begin to take it away. Would you like to introduce our first guest, Matthew?
I would absolutely love to welcome our first guest, who is Liz Moy. Welcome, Liz. Hi, how are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing well. How are you both?
Very well, thanks. Yeah.
I'm good. Thank you. Good to have you.
It's so good to be here. When you were just talking about how it can be so difficult just to get back into the swing of things, I was like, wow, I feel that, because I moved flats and started a new job in January. So I am personally in that mode of like, what is going on? What are we doing? So this definitely came at a great time for me, and I'm happy to, be here just to chat with you all and the other guests. So I'm really looking forward to it.
Great. Well, so Liz, before we bring on anyone else, let's just give a bit of background to you. So you started your career as a software engineer at Disney, which to us, well, to me in the UK sounds very exotic. Well, you're in the UK as well, but it sounds very exciting. But then you went over to become an evangelist at Twilio. So after being an engineer yourself, you wanted to help other developers to build things, and I think that's a path that a lot of DevRel people take. But then recently, as you said, you started a new job, and that's Evervault, where you're helping developers to build secure solutions. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. It's a platform that allows folks to use an API to encrypt and decrypt data and process data in like a functions environment. So yeah, it's pretty early days for kind of getting the community going there. So I'm also extremely excited to chat with both of you and the other people on the podcast or the episode here, just to like learn some more strategies, because I definitely have some experience from my days at Disney when I was involved in some of our like women in tech programs and kind of sort of serving as like internal developer relations there for a bit. And then being an evangelist full time at Twilio. Definitely got to see some things that I think worked and some things that didn't, and really, open to trying some new things and just learning what other folks in the community are doing.
Cool. And before we move on, you did warn us we might see your fluffy tuxedo cat Sanderson in the background of some calls. Maybe not today because you've got a background, but we'll keep a lookout. So yeah,
he loves to pop up and say hello, so we'll see if he does today.
Our next guest is Brian King. who's a senior community manager at Couchbase, focused on building a strong developer community there. I'm not going to give away what Couchbase does because I'd love for Brian to describe it. But before he does, Brian started at community management at Mozilla back in 2012. And then after that, built communities at both TopTool, Eclipse, and more. We're super excited to have him and his expertise represented here. Hello, Brian.
I'm not going to go on too much about Couchbase and what we do. Please check us out at couchbase.com. We are one of the leading NoSQL/cloud database platforms. Yes, we're trying to build a strong developer community. Previously, I've worked at organizations. You mentioned Mozilla. I worked at the Eclipse Foundation as well. Open source is very much in my DNA. I worked on the community team at TopTal, one of the leading talent networks in the world. We had a strong community there as well. And I also am an ex-software developer. So, before I pivoted to community management, I worked for a number of companies. So, like all DevRel people, I like to think I understand developers, but I don't think anybody ever really truly does.
Cool. Well, thanks, Brian. Let's bring on our final guest, who is Jules Damji. Jules, welcome to DevRel Roundtable. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be among esteemed guests, Rebecca, Liz, and Brian, to be sharing what we've been passionately doing for over a decade. So yeah, I'm truly excited to be here.
So, Jules, you're a lead developer advocate at Anyscale, but I think before that, people would have seen you around the Apache Spark and Apache Hadoop communities, not least of all because you're working at Databricks and Hortonworks. So, you've been around the big data streaming sort of world for some time. And I think you're joining us from California today. Is that right?
That's right. San Francisco Bay Area.
Let's start with a basic foundational question. Are community-wide post-break engagement dips a thing? Do people really kind of trail off after a summer or a New Year break? Does that actually happen in your experience?
Do you want me to go first?
Sure thing, yeah.
Yeah. I think there are various ways to look at that. I think it's common when you come from a small break, such as a holiday break in summer or winter vacation. There tends to be a little bit of a dip because of the fact that people, are on a holiday or in the summer. Europe takes off, so we hardly have any engagement during those 3 months. So it's not uncommon to do that even after the winter break. We do tend to see a dip. But I think the more dip that people now worry about is the fact that we have to think about when you have global events, global traumatic events like recession or the pandemic. And pandemic has been an event that has actually completely shifted not only the communities around the world who engage electronically, but also in person, but schools, universities, other church communities or other organizations where people actually get together. So I think this is where we actually see the deep, and this is where we actually see the behavioral change. So this is where we actually are facing most challenges. Is how do we actually get the engagement back to pre-COVID or to pre-recession? And is it really fair? I mean, I would pose the question to you guys: is it really fair to compare the engagement we had pre-COVID and right now? Should the expectations be different? Should we look at it differently? I think that's where the challenges actually rely, because comparing pre and post is a bit comparing apple and oranges. Like, do you compare the people's behavior post-war and pre-war, post-recession and pre-recession, post-COVID and pre-COVID? Is it really fair to do that? Are your OKRs and KPIs going to be exactly the same? So I think those are the challenging moments for advocates and for community managers around the world to reevaluate, re-strategize, reprioritize. What are the things you can actually do to bring some numbers up, but not necessarily exactly the same numbers? And that's how I sort of grapple with this.
Yeah, I really agree with you there. I think one of the things that I'm grappling with right now and trying to figure out is, we shifted, especially in terms of like events. Like I did a lot of developer events in my previous role, and now that I'm starting this new role, I'm looking at kind of what that looks like, and should we be doing that, and how much time should we be spending doing that, and I got so used to doing developer events virtually, and people really liked it because for a period of time, like that was a major form of interaction. So especially in the early days of the height of the pandemic, people were showing up to events and they were excited and like they wanted to participate. And I think now there's like this shift in trying to figure out like, well, there's people that still really like that virtual style and like want to continue that way, but then there's folks who would prefer to be in person, and how do you kind of bridge that gap? How do you give both groups an equally valuable experience, or do they need to be two separate things? So I totally agree with post 2020, it's really changed the way that we look at a lot of different things.
Yes, I would agree. Things have changed dramatically in community and in DevRel around the world, and it certainly is an apples and oranges situation. I think there are other types of events within a community, within a company, etc., that you will see lulls. So somewhere I have seen, for example, is after a major campaign where you've asked a lot of your community, and perhaps there's a little bit of community burnout, right? So a bit of downtime during that time, I would argue, is good. Give your community some time to process, move on to the next thing. I think after major product releases, which is very closely tied to that, there's a lot to talk about after a product release, but then maybe there isn't much to talk about after that, or isn't much to work on in terms of code. And then I think a question that you should always be asking is your community really interested in what you're doing, right? So are the projects available for them to work on? Is your product even like compelling? So that's something, a continuous conversation you should have internally, but you should also have with your community, I think.
I have a couple of follow-ups. So one is for you, Jules, and then one is for you, Brian, specifically on this topic. Jules, you had hinted that there are certain like OKRs, KPIs, goals, whatever we want to call them, that you have seen that you have changed. Let's say pre-pandemic and post, right? After such a big like seismic experience for everyone in the world. So I'd love to understand a little bit more about what those what those goals are for you. And then Brian, you had mentioned that let's say after a really big campaign, maybe your community members are like, man, we're tired. But also I'm curious if on the other side, uh, is it also a tiredness that comes from us performing the roles, right? As developer advocates, developer relations leaders, community managers. Is it our community members that like need to take a break, or is it also ourselves? Like, does how we work as the leaders or hosts of those communities also affect the potential dips in those communities? Um, so both maybe meaty questions or not. Jules, I'll pass it back to you, and then Brian, if you have anything to add, would love to hear it.
I think those are good questions because we tend to measure, well, the first thing, the challenging part about developer relations, going back to the early days, I think Matthew has spoken that at conferences. How do you actually measure the return on investment? That's always a perennial question, right? It's a long-term lead. It's a long-term investment. It's not like, the developer relation is not about closing deals, about opening minds. And so how do you actually tell your stakeholders to measure that? And we just have to manage expectations, because I do remember when I was at Hortonworks and I was at Databricks for about 6 years, and whenever I would have a meetup or I would have a workshop or I would have some sort of an in-person event, I wouldn't even have to worry about. 200 people would show up, or 50 people would show up at an in-house, or I would have a race, Spark Saturday, and I would have 150 show up. I didn't actually have to worry about it. Now, the post thing is that, should I expect 200 people, and should I tell to my stakeholders that we're having this particular event? I guarantee that you're going to have 200 people. We're going to sign up. Of those, 50 people will show up. We'll have 100 people come in. My NPS score is going to be 60 or 70 above. How do we actually mitigate, or how do we lower the presentation, the priorities? And I think that's where it is. So in terms of my KPIs now, if I'm going to have an event, I'm going to be, I'll manage the expectation by saying I'm not going to have a house full of people, because I think people are still reluctant to come in house. They might do virtually, and the times are kind of different. So I think managing those KPIs and managing those expectations is an important bit about it, because once you actually try to attain or try to reach those KPIs and OKRs they actually want pre-pandemic, you're gonna be disappointed, and your stakeholders are going to be disappointed. So, on managing expectations and making sure that you lower the expectations, but expect that over a period of time by doing different strategies. And I think the part of the conversation we're having today is what are some of the things you can actually do to somehow start bringing up to a certain level, but you're probably not going to attain the same level because people's behavior have changed, right? This has sort of become like a social science problem. How do you change people's attitude who are now entrenched in the sofa having a pint and then looking at a meetup, and if the topic is boring, they're gonna leave. Or if they're at in-person meetup, the exit strategy is slightly different. They feel embarrassed walking out in the middle of a talk. But I think people's behavior will actually change. So how do you actually shift that? How do we entice them? And there are different ways we can actually try to do that. So managing expectations, making sure that you don't overpromise, and then be disappointed when the turn up is very low.
Yeah, it's probably also an idea of like yeah, like you said, it's not just sheer numbers, right? It's about like, okay, what is the quality of how interested these people are in the product that came, and then how do we help build those relationships to make them stronger relationships that help, amplify product and feature knowledge, empower other users, maybe become champions in the future. But it's like, I forget who said it. Probably a VC, like would rather have 10 people that love you than 100 people that like you. So then it's also like, how do we measure that as well?
Yeah, quality versus quantity. I think that's a huge thing. Right.
Thank you for diving in. Brian, any thoughts on is it also our members and also us, and then how do we help navigate those relationships between how we approach our work?
Yeah, definitely. Like, if I understand your question correctly, it's like, is community burnout kind of more a reflection of how we do our work rather than community members? Absolutely. There's ways to mitigate against it. Of course, how you structure your work, how you structure your projects, how you structure your ask, right? I think, kind of structuring it, for example, in a way, kind of like, let's just call it a buffet, where community members can come in and pick and choose when and what they want to contribute to. So I remember, for example, back when I was working for Mozilla, I don't know if any of you remember, but browser releases used to be like every 1 or 2 years, right? And they were major events. Like, I remember the last one was Firefox 4, and it was like a huge download campaign and lots of activities around that. And that eventually changed to kind of a 6-week release model, where eventually we wouldn't even talk about releases, right? They would just be automatic updates that appeared in your browser. So there was no release events anymore. So what I think that did, that kind of focused the mind of various different teams, both engineering teams, localization teams, and so on, to find ways to structure their contribution projects to be more sustainable and kind of more on a steady flow over time. So yeah, absolutely. It's all about planning and how you structure.
I think Brian talked about a very important thing he actually raised about, what are some of I think both Brian and Liz talked about, what are some of the things that we should actually worry about that interest people, right? And just to take the conversation slightly differently, or introduce the whole idea behind all of us are community managers, all are advocates. What are the 3 engaging pillars of the community that actually make them successful? One is value, right? Successful, useful communities create value. And Brian talked about the value, and Rebecca mentioned about the value, and Liz mentioned about that as well. I think the value, and what is the value over here? Values are, by saying creating value, they create a content which other people can actually use. It could be blog posts, there could be social tweets that amplify your particular product. Let's say they're talking about Ray in a certain way, they're talking about how I did something in an SQL way using Couchbase, or how I actually wrote a particular application that uses the Everwolves API. those are the things that community create as a value. So we actually have to make sure that those values are perpetuated and are amplified and are enhanced. And these are the assets. This could be blogs. So useful communities create value. So that's one pillar. Value is an important part of it. The second piece is engagement. And I think this is the topic about engagement. Engaged communities kind of foster relationships that go beyond value, right? These are relationships where people come to your forum, they come to the community because there's an umbrella of psychological safety. They want to seek help. They want to ask questions without being reprimanded, because some people can be very nasty, when they ask a certain question. So I think they feel that their relationship. And the third one is an important part about the shared vision, right? Successful communities sort of foster and facilitate a shared vision. Why would you join a community if you don't believe in the vision? Why would you join a political party if you don't embrace the vision? So I think that those are the three important pillars. And if we keep on providing the value, and if we keep on making sure that the communities who actually come there have the ability to engage and learn something, and we make sure that the shared vision is articulated and amplified, I think those things are the three important parts of any community. And if you focus on those three areas, whether you provide content, whether you provide through engagement, whether you provide through in-house events, if you keep those three ingredients in mind, I think you're going to have a good overall participation. What do you guys think?
It makes sense to me. I mean, I'd love to pass over to Liz, because you mentioned your experience of the Women in Tech group at Disney, and obviously you've, over the years of your career, what are the things that you're tracking to measure those peaks and troughs in a community's engagement?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say I love surveys personally. I think everybody at my last job probably got annoyed with me saying, like, we should send a survey for this. But that's a really big one that I like to use if it's possible, just to survey the community, to ask kind of like, what are you up to? When is your busy season? I think that I worked with quite a number of developers that are what I would call like professional developers. Like they work for, a company, and a lot of times they would be using our product for a specific reason, for a project that they were working on. And, a lot of times you would see tons of API calls or just like tons of activity from them when they were building out a proof of concept. And then as soon as like that was kind of done, it would drop off. And then maybe if they were going to implement it in production, then it would go back up again. So I think like there's kind of like that side of the house of like actual usage. But then there's also that question of sort of like life events and just like things going on and activities. And another really eye-opening experience for me personally was I started out my career in the States, and then I moved over to the UK about a year and a half ago. And I realized that summertime here is a very difficult time to do anything. A lot of folks are away on holiday and enjoying it as they should be. And so a lot of times you can kind of just assume that time's going to be, pretty quiet. And actually going into autumn is sometimes a really nice time to engage, because people are getting back into the swing of things. They're trying to crank out anything that they need to do before the year comes to an end. So I think, there's kind of those like two sides of it that I think of, with sort of like, why are they using the product and what do they need to be using it for? And like, how does that relate to engagement versus like life events and like things that might be going on just for a lot of people in the world.
Does anyone have any leading indicators that enable you to predict a dip in engagement?
Good question. I think, well, for one thing, definitely, recession is definitely one bit. Layoffs is another one. We're seeing the tech industry actually going through a fair amount of turmoil. So we'll begin to see people dropping out. We'll begin to see less engagement. We'll see less Slack messages. We'll see less tweets. Maybe we'll see more frustrated tweets, or maybe reflection of those things. So I think those are any events which are actually coming up. A shift in a business or economic circumstances are one indication.
I think
I'm not sure
I think though.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, Jules. I think
Go
that's
ahead.
also an opportunity for many companies and communities, right? like they say, the best time to start a business is during a recession. I think also the
Right.
best time to really kickstart your community is during a recession as well, right? Because I think the temptation for a lot of companies during a tech downturn is to say, let's get rid of the DevRel and community teams and let's hire more sales, right? Because we need more money.
Right.
But if
Right.
you plant the seeds at this time and you build a strong community and you put good content out there, that will really, I think, set you up for future success.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, it is any disaster actually creates an opportunity as well. And as Brian, you pointed out, if you can actually recreate the content and if you can re-engage and provide the value, the important thing is that what is it that you can actually provide that brings people back. So if people has been laid off and they want to have some skills to be developed, what would I do to make sure that they would actually use Ray as a platform to be able to write distributed applications, or what are some of the things that actually can provide in Couchbase that people actually can do, their application. So I think these are the things. What is the value that actually provide that will enable them and give them the agents to go and get another job. I think that's the bit that you talked about is a good opportunity for them to reskill themselves. Yeah, definitely.
I'd love to ask if either of the three of you have created content like that, right? Like, does that mean that you shift from how to use this to do your role into mentorship types of events or into networking types of events? Or have you, Liz, I see you nodding. I'm wondering if there's like a particular time that you may have used that, like shifting, okay, how do we
Mm-hmm.
address the moment? And then what is the
Mm-hmm.
right content to engage our community members in the moment they're in?
I think historically, before the pandemic, meetups was sort of one way because developers like to hang around the waterhole called meetups, right? This is where the oases of knowledge are, and that's where they come in, with the elephants and dip their trunk and drink the juice of knowledge. Um, but the format was the same, right? Two speakers would come up, they would broadcast this thing. We would have a good chat. We would have beer, pizza, and then people would actually hang out. In the pandemic area, that wasn't possible. You couldn't actually have the one-to-one interaction. So you had to be sort of more creative in how you actually go about changing the form and format and the modality of how you actually create the content, deliver, convey it, and engage, right? And so you have to change the format, right? So you just can't have two speakers will come all night. You might want to say, okay, I'm going to have a lightning talk from a community guy, and then I'll have a main speaker to do that. Do that probably, maybe once a month. Then change the format. We're going to have a live Q&A. I'm going to bring all my committers for Ray or the open source product, and you can ask them anything you actually want about a particular release feature. That is completely different, right? Because now it's actually more interactive. Or I would have let's do on live coding today, right? Because this changes the format, and then this again um, um, facilitates what Brian was talking about. People who actually want to build their skills after recession and they don't know about how to actually use Couchbase, they would actually come and start writing or doing live coding sessions. So I think changing the form and format is one way to make sure that you actually keep on engaging, and that's one way to, because you're going to attract different people, right? You're going to have advanced or intermediate developers who want to come and listen to what a committer is going to talk about in this particular feature, in this particular aspect of that. Or you actually might have a beginner who would say, how do I actually get started? How do I, the how-to things, which is opposed to this is what the feature does, and this is how the use case is going to be. So I think changing the form and modality, asking the community, what is it that you actually want to learn? What is it you actually want to hear? And making sure that they actually provide the feedback and making sure that they are part of this event they are coming to is an important ingredient. And I think that's what sort of keeps the momentum going.
Liz, I imagine you've run a survey on this.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Well, so I mean, like most sort of DevRel folks, I'm sure, we would always do NPS surveys after each event. And I think that I was really lucky because people would often provide very good specific feedback.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
so it really gave us a nice sort of set of data points to look at and see, like, okay, people have said, like, this has come up a number of times, like, how can we adjust for this? Or even like we ran like a pretty strong, robust like webinars program throughout the pandemic. That was kind of a shift from in-person workshops to more virtual webinars, and I think that was also really helpful to hear from the community. Like, yeah, we loved that WebRTC one, and then we were like, okay, well, let's like run it again in a few more time zones. Or like, this one didn't really get that great of attendance, so maybe we don't focus on SMS that this time, or things like that. So I think the point also about focusing on what do people in the community actually need and want. I think that there's a lot of really amazing content right now for folks that are early in career. And so kind of, finding ways to bolster that, in addition to still making sure, as Jules was saying, that you are kind of giving that level to the more intermediate or advanced folks in addition. And then just, finding ways to get the content out, which is also just like a big DevRel topic, I think, generally. Like, for some reason, when we were chatting about this, I was thinking of a couple of different newsletters that I am subscribed to. And like one of them, the author every week has like a little sort of like problem that you have to solve, like a leak code style, kind of like quick one-liner that you solve. And I think stuff like that too is just like so nice to kind of keep people engaged as programmers.
Definitely, yeah. I think coding challenges for developers, I think it's always a good time to put them out to keep folks engaged. And I kind of feel like now would be a great time to really push your, if your community has an academy or educational efforts and certifications, to really, really push them out there, I think they provide great value to people.
I think Liz touched on a very important point, which is time zones, right? We used to actually be very biased about certain time zone, Pacific California. And I think having these events at different time zones gives you a larger outreach. And I think that has become more of a reality now post-COVID, because people still feel that they can, attend a particular event virtually in the comforts of their office, or in the comforts of their gym, or the comforts of their pub. Matthew, no offense. but yeah, I think that's an important part. So when you're planning all these community live events, which is different from your Slack and your discourse, because that's 24/7. You do want to keep the other audience, the global audience, in mind, and especially in the open source community. And I think Brian would attest to that. Is you got global contributors and you got global community all around the place, right? And so you want to be able to reach them and make them part of the conversation as much as possible.
So it sounds like we do think dips are a real thing, and they might be based on all sorts of things: seasonality, holidays, world impacting events, or national impacting events, depending on what that event is. And it does sound like we feel like that maybe there are some indicators that you could say, okay, I imagine I can see that there might be a dip in my community, but we might be able to change modality or medium or content style to adjust so that the community still engages, but might be engaging with different types of content depending on where they're at and what they need at that time. And so then we also talked a little bit about setting the right expectations with your stakeholders, right? So that there's still a deep bridge of communication being built between what's happening in the community and how that might impact the business, next month, 6 months from now, next year, because those two things still need to be tied together, right, in terms of what we're doing in our business job roles. So Brian, I'd love to hear from you, or maybe you kick us off, if there's any particular way that you've found a lot of success in communicating with cross-functional stakeholders about, like, hey, here's where we're at, here's what we're going to see in the community, and here's what we can expect for your team, right? Or here's what I'm going to do in terms of being a community manager, and how that might look to what we're doing in marketing, what it might look to what we're doing in sales, certainly what it would look to what we're doing in product and engineering.
Yeah, I think I've kind of been fortunate enough to be in relatively thriving open source communities where there were very compelling projects, and there was very active community members wanting to work on those projects. I think in my current role at Couchbase, it's certainly different. I think a lot of our community are enterprise developers, working either in our customers or potential prospects, or those just trying out our technologies, right, to see if they're a good fit for them. It's you mentioned marketing. I think community activities always have to, it's a two-way street. They have to be tied into GTM activities. So being constantly in touch with product and marketing and saying, hey, this is where we think communities should fit, but we also want to hear from you and where you think communities should fit. We can certainly try and predict lulls. We can look at various tools. If we're seeing a drop off, for example, in Discord engagement, that might mean something. All tools out there. Jules mentioned Meetup. There's forum posts. There's a lot of indicators you can look at. But it's just about, obviously, about communication and just setting expectations and just say, look. We don't really see a set of active contributors for this particular activity right now, so just factor that into your plans, right? Constant communication, and also, as Jules mentioned earlier as well, it's a long game, right? They might not be seeing any community activity right now, or I think Jules was talking in the context of sales, right? But it's a long play. It's about building that community over time and just setting those expectations and say, hey, we're building towards something, even if it's just more people entering our community, which will just have that snowball effect to kind of lift all boats. To use another cliched analogy there, rising tide lift all boats. So just saying, look, you may not benefit from it now, but you will later.
And I think there are different types of community, right? So already today we've discussed open source contributor communities versus end user developer communities, where people are essentially consuming a service or a product rather than contributing. And then there's new communities where everyone's maybe hasn't established who they are in the community, but they're perhaps a bit more excited. Whereas then we've all seen the older communities where people are a little bit jaded and maybe not quite as welcoming to outsiders and so on. So I wonder, do any of you see differences in the ebb and flow of engagement from community type to community type?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I think that, as you say, what happens with the older communities, right? If you look at, for example, the Apache Foundation community, it's a global community. It's got thousands of products underneath. People have been PMCs for the longest time. If you look at the Kubernetes community, it's one of the biggest ones as well. You do have people who initially, when they actually started, the fervor, the passion is there, but over a period of time, they sort of the stars somehow fade away. But I think we have to be careful between how they fade away. Are they fading away because cynicism, or are they fading away because skepticism? Skepticism is healthy in any community. You want to have some people who are skeptic about, a particular feature or a particular issue that you're actually raising, because you want to ask questions. You do want to challenge people. I think we have to worry about the cynicism bit of it, where, as Matthew pointed out, how do you actually deal with people who are jaded? How do you actually bring them in? I think bringing them in is the important bit. Is you want to make sure that the people you identified who are stars of the community, and you begin to see them less jaded, how do you actually amplify them so they keep on contributing, they keep on sharing their wealth of knowledge they've accumulated over the time? I think that's just amplification. You have to just make sure that the people who you think are incredible assets, who are providing to the community value, you keep them amplified, you keep them recognized, you bring them into the community and keep on engaging them. So that way, the skepticism is healthy, but the cynicism is somehow is what you want to counter. And this is the way I actually seeing where people who have been in the community for a long time. So I've seen this before, but what about this? What about that? I think that's an important bit.
So Liz, your work has been more in the end user, the consumer of APIs, for example, communities, as opposed to the contributor, let's build some open source project together type of community. What were the, I guess in my own experience, one of the challenges with that sort of community is that in some ways people have less of a stake in what's going on because they are consumers. So how do you build the engagement model with people to even out those dips?
Yeah, that's a great question. Also, yeah, I'm currently like trying to learn as much about the open source community as I can. So I'm really happy that Brian and Jules are both here because I've gotten a lot from the things that you've shared so far in that area. I think one of the biggest benefits to that long game that people have been talking about is that even if someone doesn't use the API right now, that doesn't mean that they won't in 4 years or 5 years. I think that, and one of the things that I say a lot in my role is like I'm really happy that I don't have to be a salesperson, because if someone's telling me about what they're building and I don't think that whatever company I might be working for is the best choice, then I'll tell them that I don't think it's the best choice. And I'm allowed to do that. And part of that is because I want people to feel like they can trust what we say, and that we're a credible source, and that then down the line, if they do need it, or maybe they need something else that we offer, they'll be like, oh wait, I had that great experience with X product. I'm going to go back and look at it again. So I think keeping that idea in mind, that like even if someone learns about your product at a student hackathon, that doesn't mean to say that they won't use it in a job that they get a couple years down the line, or at a startup that they might want to start. So I think, yeah, kind of trying to just like think about it from a bigger picture perspective rather than a short-term one can be really helpful.
User communities can be extremely challenging, and one of the main reasons is because software developers can be very fickle in that they kind of tend to jump platforms and jump technologies to the new hotness, right? So if you're not providing a compelling experience for them, they're just going to look to the next thing. I think the main way to provide a compelling experience, obviously, you need to have a vibrant community, but also just have like a rock solid product. Make sure the product, is continues to do what they want it to do and meets their business needs or whatever their application building needs. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just to add on what Liz and Brian touched on a very salient point, which is I think there's a difference between the open source community and the user end community, because one is, you have access to the source. If I can't find a solution in the community, I'll just go and look at the source and I'll figure it out. And people who are comfortable with that will do that. With what Liz pointed out was, how do I actually use this particular API? And what Brian pointed out, you give them a developer experience that is frictionless, right? Because there's an inverse relation between friction and fusion. If it's gonna take me, 5 hours to figure out how am I going to use this secured API, I mean, that Liz talking about, as opposed to I can just go to the documentation and I can search and I can navigate and I can find good examples and I can find good code and I can find, not only beginner examples but intermediate examples and entire use cases. You have this wealth of information available to you that makes the developer experience easier. They'll stick with. I'll just go to Everwall because I know there's a gallery of examples. I know that I can ask a question and somebody is going to answer me within 5 minutes or within 24 hours. I think that's an important bit, and I think Brian pointed out is the user experience is important. Once you introduce friction, you're going to lose. People as developers, they want to solve the problem right away, and if it's going to take me 5 hours or 5 minutes, I'm going to jump to the next product, and I think that's an important bit about it.
Yeah, I think you all are hitting the trifecta, right? Like Brian, you said a rock solid product. Jules, you're basically saying like rock solid documentation or ways for me to help understand what I need to be doing. And then Liz, the joke I was going to make, but then I totally cut Brian off, was that you're talking about rock solid trust, right? And a rock solid community host or developer advocate. And I was going to say you're like the perfect stylist, where you wear this API and you're like, how's it look? And you're like, that's not flattering for you. And so like that's rock solid trust. That's the stylist you go back to because you actually want to know. And so I think it's the developer advocate, right? The product that they're advocating for, and then the information and documentation around that product. I think you all just described that trifecta of empowerment for a developer. So curious as far as like moving on toward future thoughts and solutions perhaps, and maybe the solution for re-engaging a community is simply giving them time, space, and the opportunity to engage, but not necessarily saying like you must engage. But I am curious if there are any experiments that any of you have run during a dip in community where you're like, wow, we did not realize that people were super excited to come back around that theme. So if there's any experiments you might have run that you actually saw were quite successful during a normally slow time, or any ideas that those experiments, successful or quote unquote failed, have led into other things that people might be able to use for re-engagement.
I think it's a whole question about how to actually persuade people without forcing them to do things. And I think this is appealing to the agency, right? It's very important for them that that community members or developers actually have full control of the agency. And so you try to do a couple of things. You try to highlight certain gaps in their particular knowledge to say, hey, listen, we are doing this particular workshop, or we are having this particular, we are posting this particular blog, and there's going to be a series of blogs. These are the things that we think people can actually learn from it. What do you think, right? Would you be interested in that? So I think giving them the agency and identifying the gap, because once you tell them what do you actually think about product A, is that satisfies your knowledge? Is there a gap between how you used to do things and what you can actually do with this new thing? That sort of clicks in the interest and gives them the agency to say, I'm going to engage. The second thing is, I think posing questions like this, I'm doing this, what do you think? Will this actually help you? That again appeals to the agency. So I think doing these kinds of experiments and changing the form and format, I think Liz alluded earlier, which is about doing a constant poll, or doing a Q&A, or doing office hours, for example, or doing hands-on coding sessions. All these different forms of experiments, I think, at least in my case, that was kind of helped a little bit. There hasn't been that inflection point. We begin to see more and more people are sort of willing to actually come in and do that. And the second thing, how do you actually now do the hybrid thing? Because this requires a little bit of logistics, right? So if you want to have an event, let's say in San Francisco, and you want to do it at a happy hour, is it feasible to do a happy hour with a hybrid, right? What are people going to be drinking virtually? I think that's another bit. So I think these are different changes in these experiments that I'm sort of playing around with, and I have ideas what I'm going to implement for the Q1 H1, and see how it goes.
Some things that have worked for me in the past are in-person meetings for your community. I know that's tricky at this time, and it's also depends on the nature of your community and the size of your community. Like if it's a large community, you can't invite thousands of people to get together, right? But maybe, for example, you have an ambassador program. Maybe it's a good time to get all the ambassadors together. That's a smaller group, right? And say, hey, let's plan for the next year. Let's see what we can do. Never underestimate the strength of like a new edition T-shirt. So during a downtime, get your design team on it and say, hey, let's get this out to our most active contributors, and you'll see the photos up on social media and so on. It's good. It's always a good time to reward and recognize and call out your community. But when you have more time to do it, perhaps that's a very good time.
So in my last role, and honestly, I think I see this a lot more in like sort of the Airtables and Zapiers and like these sort of like really great new low code tools that exist, where it's really allowing people to like build these experiences essentially with like little to no code. I was realizing that there were a lot of those that I saw people using in conjunction with our product, and I also had heard just like these random stories kind of like either like I heard the story of an artist who basically hired like a whole team to build an entire project that used some of our APIs, which was a really cool project. And other than just like little stories of like people that wouldn't have what I would say is like a traditionally like tech background, but like did want to use like our APIs to build something. So when we kind of had like a little bit of a lull, I proposed that we try doing a hackathon for artists, and kind of like give them some enablement tools of how they could get started like building some sort of something that they wanted to create. And it actually was so great. We partnered with a organization called Kodame that's based in the Bay Area. So a lot of artists from their community participated, and then some artists that just like we kind of knew or people knew through our networks. And yeah, the projects that came out of it were really interesting, and it was just so dramatically different from like a lot of the other things that we would see people using the product to build. So I was very happy and excited about that possibility, because I think it opened up my eyes to the fact that there were like a lot of other communities that I typically wouldn't think of, you know, serving, but that were still there and excited to play and to build.
Perhaps an underlying theme that each of you are touching on, that I had no words to articulate until the three of you just answered, so thank you, is almost this idea of, I mean, we're always serving our communities and building for them, even if we're not present externally or they're not quote unquote present at the time, right? What we're still doing then is when we are perhaps quieter or more internal, we are building the things that will serve them externally, like when they're ready. And so I think both of you touched on that, right? Can you find new partnerships that make sense? Are there other communities you should be engaging with that you as a developer advocate or developer manager or community success manager, right, can start to build those relationships with in the downtime, because you also actually have time to dig in. And like Brian, I think you said, right, like um get those designs ready. And that's like one example of, there are so many things where we end up using the same swag, for example, right, because we made that design once and we haven't had time to go back and work with our internal design teams or order the things that we needed or change anything really. And so I think that those quiet moments are so important for us to then go build those relationships either with our internal stakeholder teams or with ourselves to refine what we need in terms of how to set ourselves up for success for serving the community, or building those other partnerships or finding those like new ways to give ourselves the time to connect with community members when they're back and when they're ready to engage. Um, with that said, I want to thank you for that. It's not always about how do we make sure people are engaging, but how do we prepare to allow them to engage best. So maybe the internal or some of those quiet lulls are actually just really great for like hibernation mode of like, you know, self-reflection and then building to build forward. So thank you for those insights. And Matthew, I believe that you have a little outro for us and some questions for how we can connect with everyone here on the show.
Yeah, well, one thing that's come up for me in this episode has been a call back to DevRel Book Club, where we covered a book called Laziness Does Not Exist. And one of the central themes of that book was that we as human beings need to make downtime. You know, we're allowed to have downtime. If we don't have it, then bad things happen. And I think it's the same for communities. And yeah, so it's really, really great to have that kind of echoed
So
here.
I guess the downtime can manifest itself in asking less, right? Giving the community time to breathe as much as you need the time to breathe as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
asking less.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, just not to be tongue in cheek here, but Matthew and Rebecca, did you consider asking this question to ChatGPT and see what kind of answers you get?
Every time I go on, it's too busy, so I'm stuck in the Stone Age, I'm afraid.
Then you wouldn't need us. You know?
I need you.
You can just do a screen share of it, and that's it.
That's right. We can just do it live and see what kind of questions they actually answer. But yeah, that would be fun. I'll try to post some questions. If I get some insightful answers that doesn't match any of us three provided you, then I'll forward those to you.
Or you can post them publicly. And with that in mind, where can people find you, Jules? Where should they connect with you publicly?
Oh, of course, yeah. I mean, I think when Matthew introduced me, I didn't say what I do. I work for a company called Anyscale, who are the original creators of Ray, and those people actually want to wonder what Ray is all about. We are entering what I would call the zeitgeist to AI and machine learning, right? And Ray is one of the products that actually one of the open source products that came out from Rice Lab in UC Berkeley, which was a successor of AmpLab, where Spark was born and Mesos was born. To Rice Ray is this distributed system that allows you to scale your AI and workloads. So yeah, very excited to be part of it. In fact, Chat GPT and GPT-3 were trained using Ray. So we are definitely sort of in that particular distributed computing horsepower that we actually provide. So yeah, you can connect me on Twitter. Follow me, I'll follow you. I know it sounds dodgy, but we follow each other everywhere in this world. Connect me on LinkedIn. More than happy to ask you any questions about Ray or anything you actually want to talk about. Generally, I'm here 24/7.
Well, give yourself a little downtime, Jules. So maybe like 23/6.
Well, I have a chatbot that answers the questions on 24/7. Just kidding.
So, Liz, how about you?
Yeah, I actually think I'm going to change my my job title to API stylist because I love that so much. So you can find me on LinkedIn as API stylist. But yeah, thanks again so much for having me. This was really great, and I feel like I learned a lot from everybody in the episode. So I am doing developer advocacy over at Evervault. We have a data encryption platform that will let you encrypt any incoming and wrap on data and also process that data as well. So we're just getting things started over there, but it's a really exciting time. So if you have any questions about encryption or anything security related, if I don't know the answer myself, I can find somebody who knows the answer. So you can find me on Twitter at ECMOY and at LinkedIn under Liz Moy.
Great, thanks. And Brian, we've watched in real time as the sunset has come to your home through the window. Where can people find you online?
You can find me online. Sorry, I was going to say you can find me running around the fields outside during my downtime in rural Ireland. You can find me at Brian King on Twitter. And if you want to find out more about the Couchbase community, go to couchbase.com/community. And the best place to, if you're interested in a modern, fast, and flexible database platform, trying it out for your applications, I urge you to join our discourse where you can have real-time conversations with our teams. I'll be there.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, everyone.
Sorry, did I say? I think I said discourse. I meant Discord. I'm always mixing up those two. Yes, our Discord server. Excuse me.
When I worked at Couchbase, we did have a discourse, so I just thought it was.
We still do.
That's still okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, look, thank you, everyone, so much. This has been a great discussion. I really appreciate you joining me and Rebecca, but also to everyone who's watched and will be watching the video subsequently. So I guess see you around on the internet.
Right.
Thank you for having us. Delighted to be here.
My favorite API stylist. Have a great day.